Hello students, this is Dr. Sansom here to introduce our data analysis experiment about nuclear chemistry. And our thought for today is one of my favorite scriptures from 2 Timothy 1:7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And I always come back to this whenever I feel afraid, because one of these three things is usually the solution to my fear. And I share this scripture today because we're going to be talking about nuclear chemistry, which frankly is something that people sometimes feel afraid of. And I'm hoping that as you get to understand it better, you will feel less fear and more sound mind. Goals for today include identifying likely modes of radioactive decay for unstable isotopes based on their neutron and proton ratios, writing symbols for isotopes and radioactive particles, using mass numbers and nuclear charges to predict the identity of particles formed in nuclear reactions, or balancing the nuclear equations. And we're going to be talking specifically about alpha, beta, positron decay, and then also electron capture, although we'll focus less on that and more on the positron emission. And the process skill for today is critical thinking. We'll be using critical thinking today because you're going to be making arguments, making claims about whether you think a certain isotope is the most stable isotope for that element. And then you're going to support that with evidence that you're going to explore as you're doing the experiment, the different kinds of evidence that you could use to make that claim. So you'll have to analyze the information you have to identify what's useful in supporting your claim, and then put different kinds of information together to make a more complete understanding, support your argument with evidence, and then provide an analysis to compare or critique different arguments or results. So why nuclear chemistry? Sometimes when we think of nuclear chemistry, we think of bombs and things that are bad and dangerous. But nuclear chemistry is also used for energy production in nuclear power plants. Nuclear reactions formed all of the elements in the universe, so it's a principle of creation. And nuclear medicine or radiation therapy can be used to treat diseases. There's a variety of other medical uses for radiation as well. So, what's happening in the nucleus? In the nucleus, you have protons and neutrons. The protons, because they're positively charged, actually repel each other. So, how does the nucleus stay together? There's something called the strong nuclear force, which is an attraction among nucleons. So, all of the nucleons are attracted to each other. And in a stable nucleus, the strong nuclear force is greater than the electrostatic repulsion, so it stays together. Neutrons help to stabilize the nucleus if there's a lot of protons, so you'll notice on the next slide we'll see that the proton and neutron ratio changes as you increase the number of protons. You need a greater number of neutrons. So this is a chart showing on the x-axis the number of protons, on the y-axis the number of neutrons. And you can see for all elements except hydrogen, there are no stable isotopes that have a greater number of protons than neutrons. Hydrogen's the exception because it just has one proton and that's it. If we have low numbers of protons, then we usually have about the same number of neutrons as we do protons. They're equal. In between an atomic number of about 20 to about 83, the number of neutrons is greater than the number of protons, and it actually gets bigger and bigger, a larger deviation from a 1-to-1 ratio as the atoms get heavier. And once you get above 83 for your atomic number, all isotopes are unstable, and there are no stable nuclei in that region. So if we look at the periodic table and we look at bromine, the molar mass for bromine is about 80, 79.9. And if we're talking about bromine 83, well, then we know that it has more neutrons than that stable isotope. We expect something like bromine 80 or 79. Bromine 83 is going to have too many neutrons. So what notation do we use to talk about this? We have the symbol here for uranium-238. On the top, on the left side, we put the mass number. On the bottom, we put the atomic number. Of course, the element symbol U here is the same as saying 92. So as long as you have a periodic table, the 92 is a little bit redundant. We have alpha particles. These are like a helium nucleus, 2 protons and 2 neutrons. beta particles. So we have the symbol beta, sometimes also written as just an electron because it has the same mass and charge as an electron. It just comes from the nucleus instead of the electron cloud. And then we have a positron particle, which is like the beta particle, except it has a positive charge. So it has a +1 on the bottom here, and it is the same mass as an electron. So how do we make a nucleus more stable? There's lots of different ways that this can happen. One way is alpha emission, and this is particularly common for those very heavy elements with the atomic number greater than 83. And we start with a certain mass number, that's our A, and a certain atomic number, which is our Z. If we're releasing an alpha particle, then we end up with a different element now that has a mass that's 4 less than what it used to be, and a charge on the nucleus that's 2 less than what it used to be. So the atomic number changes. We have a different element here. So that's symbolized by this change from X to Y. We can also have beta emission. In beta emission, a neutron in the nucleus releases this beta particle that's negatively charged, and it becomes a proton. So you'll see the change in the atomic number is +1, but the mass number is unchanged. This is good when you have too many neutrons because it turns the neutron into a proton. We have positron emission, and this is where a proton in the nucleus releases the positron and becomes a neutron. Because of that, our atomic number is going to go down by 1, our mass number will stay the same. In all of these processes, the total number of protons and neutrons, or nucleons, is conserved. Positron emission happens when you have relatively too many protons or not enough neutrons. Finally, there's electron capture, and electron capture is a little bit funny. It is when a nucleus will sort of suck an electron out of its own electron cloud and pull it into the nucleus. And this will take a proton and turn it into a neutron. So it has the same effect here that positron emission does. It's just more likely in heavier nuclei. Most elements that can do positron emission can also do electron capture. In this class, we're going to be focusing on positron emission and electron capture as sort of a single pathway, one that reduces the number of protons and increases the number of neutrons. So if we look at gold 200, what kind of pathway do we think is most likely? On the periodic table, gold has a mass of 196. So if we have a mass here of 200, that clearly means we have too many neutrons. And so the best pathway for us would be to do beta emission, which converts a neutron into a proton and helps us get closer to that stable ratio of neutrons and protons. When we're writing nuclear reactions, there are 2 important principles: conservation of mass and conservation of charge. And so in this case, we have the conservation of the mass number. However many nucleons we have on the left side, we should have the same number on the right side. And we also have conservation of charge. The nice thing about this is it means that we can balance these things. So for example, if we have a bombardment reaction here, we've got nitrogen 14 and we're shooting a helium nucleus at it. What's the particle that we're going to create in addition to the proton? Well, if we look at the mass number, we've got 14 plus 4 on the left, and then we've got our missing particle plus 1 from our proton on the right. So we can solve, and our mass number should be 17. Likewise, for the atomic number, we can have 7 plus 2 on the left, and that equals our atomic number plus 1 on the right. And we can solve for that, and it's 8. And because it's 8, we know it's oxygen. So we can fill in our missing particle as oxygen 17. So here's the question just asking about polonium, and it's turning into lead. What do we notice that's happening? Our atomic number has gone down by 2. Our mass number has gone down by 4. That sounds like an alpha particle. We could also look at the element polonium having an atomic number higher than 84. Most of those are going to decay by alpha emission. There are 3 pieces of evidence that we're going to look at today to talk about the stability of the nuclei and isotopes that you'll be investigating. And the first one of these is something called mass excess. Mass excess is defined as the mass of the nucleus in atomic mass units minus its mass number. The more negative the mass excess is, the more stable the nucleus. And because AMU are defined by carbon-12, the mass excess for carbon-12 is 0. That means that if isotopes are more stable than carbon-12, they're going to have a negative mass excess, and isotopes that have positive mass excesses are less stable than carbon-12. So mass excess is a relative way to discuss stability. You've also learned in Chem 106 about mass defect. This is defined in a slightly different way. It's the mass of the nucleus in AMU minus the mass of the free nucleons. This one is, in a sense, more intuitive because it relates directly to the binding energy, which we'll talk about in a moment. And we can infer the same things from this information. The more negative it is, the more stable the nucleus. However, for any nucleus that exists, the mass defect will always be negative, whereas mass excess could be positive or negative depending on how it relates to carbon-12. The next thing that we're going to be looking at is called binding energy. And binding energy is the energy needed to separate the nucleons, to break up the forces holding the nucleus together and create those free nucleons. This is directly related to the mass defect for an isotope by Einstein's equation E equals mc squared. If your m is the mass defect, then your E is the binding energy. And the larger the binding energy, the more stable the nucleus is. And to make a fair comparison, we use binding energy per nucleon. So if we look at these three nuclei, helium, iron, and uranium, and we just look at binding energy, we'll see that uranium is the clear winner. But uranium is also a very large nucleus, so it's not really fair to compare the binding energy for uranium to something small like helium. So instead, we divide by the mass number, so we get binding energy per nucleon. And now, these are all sort of the same order of magnitude, and we can compare them apples to apples. And we can see when we do that that it's actually iron that is the most stable of these nuclei. So we can graph here the mass number and then the binding energy per nucleon on the y-axis. And you can see that lighter elements lighter than iron 56, have lower binding energies, which means that they're less stable. Iron is very stable. These guys over here will often undergo fusion so that they can form heavier nuclei. On the right side, we see these heavy elements have also lower binding energies than iron, but it's a less extreme slope as we get to these very heavy elements. These elements can undergo fission in order to become smaller elements that have larger binding energies. So again, if the binding energy is large, that means that we have a more stable nucleus. And this is correlated with our mass defect. The more negative our mass defect, the more stable our nucleus. A final way that we'll talk about nuclear stability is by half-life. Atoms that are radioactive will spontaneously release alpha, beta, gamma radiation, positron emission, etc. And these follow first-order kinetics. And it's because there's just one atom. It doesn't have to collide with anything. Just by itself, it will release those particles or rays. And we calculate a half-life, which is the time for half of the sample to decay, and we use this to measure the stability or how long these isotopes will endure in nature. The longer the half-life, the more stable the nucleus is. In lab today, you're going to be looking at this chart from the International Atomic Energy Agency, and you're going to be thinking about several things. So first, what are the different decay pathways and where are they most common? Why do they decay that way? What do they get out of it? Why does it make them more stable? And how does that relate to what's going on in the nucleus? And then finally, you're going to compare a bunch of different isotopes of the same element, and you're going to look for patterns in those three properties we talked about: the mass defect, binding energy, and half-life. And you're going to try to use those to justify which isotopes are more stable or less stable. That's the end of our pre-lab lecture for today. Thanks for listening and enjoy the lab.